Hi everybody, I'm Tony Schaefer from What Drives Us, and this is one in a series of videos I'm making about hypermiling. If you've seen my video about the best way to come to a stop, you know that actively capturing as much energy as possible through active regeneration is the best way to approach a stop. If you haven't yet seen that video, spoilers. So as you become more advanced in your hypermiling, you'll want to eliminate braking altogether. Now, most people put no value in the amount of energy that's used getting your car up to speed. But if you remember, you should actually chuck a dime out your window every time you slow down and chuck a quarter every time you come to a complete stop. I'll be behind you picking up all the dimes and quarters. But seriously, think about if you were riding a bike. All right, now most people know how to ride a bike, and most people know how hard it is to get up to speed from a dead stop. You would rather maintain a steady state. You would rather keep rolling. The last thing you want to do when you're on a bike is to come to a complete stop and put your foot down, because you know you're going to have to get back up and push really hard in order to get back up to speed. And that's what we're talking about. So throughout this video, I'm going to be talking about your car and braking and slowing down. But what I need you to think about is, what if I were riding a bike? How would I handle the situation? How would I avoid coming to a complete stop? So of course, when most people think about coming to a complete stop and braking in general, they think about red lights. The typical approach to a red light is to maintain speed and pray to God the light changes before you get there. But fortunately, you're not typical. So here's what you do. You consider how long the light has already been red. And you know this because you've been paying attention. You look far ahead. So you saw the light go from green to yellow to red. You know how long it's been red so far. And then you count the number of cars in front of you. Those that are already stopped at the red light, and those in front of you maintaining steady speed so they can slam on their brakes at the last minute, because we know they all do that. And then you do some math. See, here's what I've found. Once that light changes from red to green, it takes about a second to a second and a half for each car in line to get rolling. So let's say there's 3 cars in front of you. That's going to be between 3 and maybe 5.5, 3 or 4.5 seconds before you'll be able to start moving. So you will do some math. You'll figure out how long it'll be before that car right in front of you starts moving, and you'll try to time your approach so that you're rolling up behind that car as it starts moving. Now, I don't always recommend doing hard math, don't pull out a notepad and count the cars and write it down and pull out a calculator, but you'll start getting a feel. 5 cars feel about this long, 10 cars feel about this long. And you'll really start getting a feel for this, and you'll start being able to better time your approach to that red light. Now, I have to give you a warning, of course. There will be at least one person texting during the red light. They won't even notice the light turned green. Or there's an entire family and they're carrying on a conversation and they didn't notice the light turned green. So even while you are trying to roll up and not come to a complete stop, you must always be aware that someone might not start as soon as that light turns green. You need to consider that. And even if you don't get the timing perfectly right, even if you have to apply the brakes and slow down a little more, you should always try to maintain some level of speed. The key here is to not come to a complete stop. I mean, really, the point of this video is to avoid braking at all. So if you can coast through without even tapping the brake, that's great. The second best thing is to actively regen, put some energy back into the battery, but make sure that you never come to a complete stop. It seems that almost every day on my commute, someone at some point slams on their brakes and says, "Oh yeah, I need to turn now." What's up with that? It's like they're driving along, sometimes even exceeding the speed limit, and they just now remembered, "I live here," or "Oh my gosh, I work here." They knew they were going to turn. They drive the same route every day, just like you do, and yet for some reason, they maintain this speed until they slam on their brakes and make a turn. And what this does, of course, is without the warning, everybody has to slam on their brakes and the traffic backs up and it's all a big mess. Not only does this cause a big mess to everybody behind you, but slamming on your brakes, come on, that's the worst possible way to make a turn, period. So you are going to do it different because you want a hypermile, and this is how you should do it. If you know you're going to be turning, first thing you do is put on your indicator. Now, it's an indicator. You're indicating to the cars behind you, hey, I'm going to be turning here. So now they, hopefully, start slowing down because the next thing you're going to do is lift your foot off the accelerator and you are going to start using passive regeneration to slow your car down. If you time it just right, and if you slowed to a manageable speed, consider making a no-brake turn. Yes, you heard that right. Do not apply your brakes and make the turn. Now, here's what I found when I was experimenting with this. I would usually push on my brake until I reached about 20 miles an hour, and then I would make my turn. So all I did was slow down until I reached 20 miles an hour, and then I made my turn. It turns out that 20 miles an hour with your foot on the brake is the exact same 20 miles an hour if your foot is not on the brake. It just feels different, and you're going to have to get used to that. I really do recommend that you try this, practice this, but make sure you're doing it when there's no traffic around. The last thing you want, of course, is to lose control of your car or panic or anything that puts anyone else's vehicle in any danger whatsoever. Always maintain control of your car. You should make sure you have mental notes of where people tend to do this speed brake turn thing, because it turns out people do this regularly. So if they did it today, they're probably going to do it tomorrow, and they're probably going to do it next week. If there's a place where people tend to do this more commonly, make a note of this. You drive the same route almost every day. So you should know where people are prone to do things like this. If it's a multi-lane road and people tend to slam on their brakes and turn right, then just for that little bit, get in the left lane so you can avoid that. And the same thing, if people do the same thing, they turn left, get in the right lane. The key here is to avoid those situations by creating a mental map of where people tend to do this, so you're anticipating other people's behaviors. And speaking of anticipation, there's a whole series of anticipatory driving techniques. Every day during my commute, I have several opportunities where I can anticipate other drivers' behavior. I'm willing to bet that after listening to my short list of what I can do to anticipate other drivers, you'll have a very similar list. Now, some of them might be the same. Some of them might be different and very specific to your case. But I'm going to list a few of them here just to give you ideas of what I'm talking about. The one I'm going to start with is fast food row. Every morning I drive past a Starbucks and a Dunkin' Donuts. Every evening I drive past a strip of fast food joints. And almost every time somebody stops and turns. Occasionally they'll use their indicator. Occasionally they'll let people know that they're going to be turning. But usually they'll put on their indicator only after they've slammed on their brakes. And that just causes all kinds of mayhem. And if you know me, you know that I do not condone left lane cruising. But situationally, it's a good idea to get in the left lane if you know there's a very high probability that somebody is going to be rapid braking and turning out of the right lane. And if you drive the same route every day, you know where the Starbucks is, you know where the McDonald's is, you know where the Tim Hortons is, you know when people are going to be stopping and they're going to be turning. Maybe you don't drive past any of those. Maybe you don't drive past a fast food joint in the evening where people are stopping for dinner. But I'm willing to bet you have something. There's always something. If you're driving around in the morning during the school year, there's a good chance you're going to see school buses. And depending on where you live and where your commute is, there's a good chance you're going to see a mass transit bus. Regardless of the kind of bus you're following, it's going to make stops. because you drive the same route every day and because you make mental notes, you're going to know when that bus is going to stop. And that will allow you to let off the accelerator, regen a little, create a following distance so that hopefully when that bus starts going again, you won't need to brake physically and you can just accelerate back up following that bus. Now, unlike red lights, buses are a lot harder to anticipate. Sometimes it takes longer for the students or the passengers to get on the bus or get off the bus. There's a lot of variables there. The key is to try to anticipate that the bus is going to stop, to let off the accelerator, and see if you can get it right so that you don't have to use the brake pedal at all, so that when the bus gets going again, you can just roll up behind it. Now, in addition to making passenger stops, all buses stop at railroad tracks. If you know tracks are coming up, and because you pay attention, you do know tracks are coming up, you should once again let off the accelerator, create that buffer, capture some energy back into the battery, and hopefully as the bus gets up again after the railroad tracks stop, you can roll up and not have to brake at all. Again, the caveat is not all drivers stop for the same amount of time. It's really hard to judge, but at least you should try. Anticipate the stop, let off the accelerator, create that buffer, and if you do it just right, you won't need to use your brakes at all, and you'll just roll up behind the bus as it crosses the tracks. I've already touched on a few situations in which people might be driving along, slam on their brakes, and make a turn without using their turn signals. In fact, let's call them what they are. They're called turn indicators. This is because driving is a communal activity, and we are supposed to indicate when we're going to make a turn. But of course, a lot of people don't do that. Fortunately, you're not a lot of people. Not only do you use your indicators, you pay attention to where other people are more likely to turn. They're getting their morning cup of coffee, they're getting their dinner in the evening, or they just remembered that they work here. Because you drive the same route every day, you become very familiar where these situations are most likely to occur, and you anticipate those things. If it's a multi-lane street, you get in the other lane because you have seen day after day people will slam on their brakes and make a right turn, so you go left to go around them. If it's a single lane and you know that there's a school up ahead, for example, and a lot of people don't use their indicator, then you start trailing back. You let off the accelerator, you get some passive regeneration, and by the time they've made their turn, you can just roll right through. The key here is, even if people don't anticipate when they're going to turn, you have enough experience and you've made enough mental notes that you know there's a high probability they're going to do it today. Now, I've already talked about stoplights, but that was a very generic, there's a red light, how do you handle it? There are very specific situations with lights, and what I want to talk about right now are timed lights. These are lights in which there's a series of lights, and it could be just 2 of them or 3 of them or more, in which they turn green to red at very specific and timed intervals. As you drive the same route day after day after day, you'll begin to recognize which lights are timed and specifically how quickly you need to drive between those lights in order to catch the green. This is another example of being intimately familiar with your regular route. Sometimes you'll need to drive a little slower so the light turns green before you get there. And sometimes you'll need to drive a little faster so that you'll make it through the green before it turns red. Sometimes there's absolutely nothing you can do with the traffic situation. Sometimes there's so much traffic that you can't drive any faster or slower and you just have to go with the flow. Now, you might have already paused and rewound and you might have said, wait a minute, did Tony actually just say I should drive faster? As a matter of fact, I did. If you have to drive a little faster in order to catch the green light, that is always better than coming to a complete stop and starting up again. Remember, the key here is to avoid braking at all situations. So if you have to drive a little slower, that beats racing to a red light stopping, and then the light turning green as soon as you come to a complete stop. And if you have to drive a little faster, well, that beats driving at a regular speed and then stopping, waiting for the entire red light, and then again coming up to speed after you've been to a dead stop. So you have to sometimes drive faster just to avoid using your brakes because it's less energy intensive. Sounds counterintuitive, but it really is the best way to conserve and use the energy that your car is putting out. Now, as I said, this is not a complete list of all the different levels of anticipation that you'll have on your route. I mean, a lot of them are going to be very specific to your daily commute, and there's simply no way I can list that. But in the end, you are going to become familiar with your regular drive so much that as you are driving mile for mile, you'll be able to know this is where this situation typically occurs. And because of your higher than average level of anticipation, you may be able to do a complete commute without ever fully stopping your car. And ideally, you'll be able to do it without ever even using your brakes. Let's recap. The most energy intensive part of driving is getting your car up to speed from a dead stop. And this is why we want to avoid using the brakes if possible. We want to strive to maintain at least some level of movement at all times. If you can roll, that's great. Coming to a stop, again, you have to move the car up from a dead stop. Having a little momentum is better than having no momentum. And best case scenario is that you're anticipating all the things around you, you know what's coming, and you'll be able to react before they even occur. Always think about riding your bike and how you would react if you were the sole source of power. You probably wouldn't accelerate to red lights. You probably wouldn't stay right on the bumper of somebody you know is going to be braking. You would certainly behave differently if you were riding your bike versus if you were driving. Tend to be more like if you were riding your bike. And most importantly, as always, safety before mileage. If you find yourself in a situation where you have to compromise hypermiling, you need to do that. Sacrifice good mileage to maintain safety for you and all the other people on the road. Once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you want to watch more videos about hypermiling, make sure you visit the What Drives Us YouTube channel. This is where you'll find other videos on hypermiling, our weekly shows, car reviews, and other special events that we've recorded. We record our shows almost every Wednesday night. We have a live chat room. You really should be in that chat room. If you want to be notified when the show starts, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so that you'll receive notifications. Thanks again, and remember, I'm not asking you to drive less, just drive better.